Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. First up, an important announcement. Just like last year, this year as well, starting September 4, 2021, we will be launching a special crash course called Target Prelims 2021. In these live lectures, we will help you revise current affairs of the period June 2020 to August 2021. Which will help you ace Prelims 2021. Let us know your thoughts regarding this crash course in the comment section below. And if you're liking this initiative, press the like button, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and spread this word. And let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a newspaper article on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu, relevant for GS paper 2. Lok Sabha has passed a bill, a constitutional amendment bill, a 127th constitutional amendment bill, which will restore the powers of the states. Now states can also specify their own socially and educationally backward classes of citizens, or OBCs. But now let's try and understand this newspaper article in slight detail. The year was 2018. A constitutional amendment act was passed called 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Because of this Constitutional Amendment Act, basically 3 articles were inserted into the Constitution. Article number 1, 342 capital A. What this 342 capital A basically deals with, it deals with the central list of OBCs. At the central level, who all are socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. Their details are mentioned in this central list. The second article which got inserted because of this constitutional amendment was Article 366 26C. And this article basically defines socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. And the third article which was inserted was Article 338 capital B, which basically created another constitutional body called National Commission for the Backward Classes, or NCBC. Prior to this constitutional amendment, NCBC was a statutory body created by an act of the Parliament. But because of this Constitutional Amendment Act, a constitutional status was provided to this body called National Commission for the Backward Classes. But the legislative intent behind this constitutional amendment was that on one hand, we will have a central list established by the central government, which will list down all those who are socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. But on the other hand, the states will also have their own right to set up those who are socially and educationally backward. That means we will have a central list of OBCs, and the states are free to have their own list of socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. But then there was a concern. The concern raised was, because of this Constitutional Amendment Act, does this mandate that we will have a single central list? And this single central list will also specify socially and educationally backward classes of citizens for each state as well? Just like we have a list for SCs and STs at the central level, does that also mean that we will have a single central list created by the central government, and the single central list will also specify those who are socially and educationally backward for every state as well? This was one concern which was raised. So the concern which was raised was, does this act take away the powers of the states to prepare and maintain a separate list of socially and educationally backward classes of citizens? Then something else happened. In the state of Maharashtra, Marathas were provided reservation in government jobs and educational institutions. But because of this Maratha reservation, the state of Maharashtra violated the 50% cap on reservation. What is this 50% cap? In a landmark judgment in the year 1993, which is known as the Mandal case or Indra Sani versus Union of India, in this case, the Supreme Court said that reservation cannot exceed 50%. But reservation can exceed 50% only in exceptional circumstances, only in certain special circumstances. This year, the Supreme Court struck down this Maratha reservation. Supreme Court said that Maratha reservation violates the 50% cap imposed by the Supreme Court in the Indira Sani judgment. That is why this Maratha reservation is unconstitutional. One argument given by the state government of Maharashtra was that these Marathas are basically socially and educationally backward. Why? Because majority of these Marathas, they are dabbawalas, or what we call the tiffinwalas. They are socially backward, they are educationally backward. That is why they don't have jobs. That is why majority of them are these dabbawalas and tiffinwalas in Maharashtra. Supreme Court rejected this contention, and the argument was that when we look at somebody or a community which is socially backward, this socially backward or educationally backward community basically deals with history. That means historically a community has been discriminated against, and that is what this discrimination leads to: social and educational backwardness. And this historic backwardness or discrimination is based on the concept of purity and pollution. So there are some communities which are deemed as polluted, and these communities which are deemed as polluted, we don't take water from them, we don't take food from them. That means the food cooked by these so-called backward classes of the society, we don't take cooked food from them, we don't drink water from their hands. And if you are saying that Marathas are socially and educationally backward, but at the same time you are saying that majority of them are dabbawalas, that means they basically provide food to other members of the society. It is because of this reason that we can say that they are not backward, because the other members of the society, they don't consider them as polluted because they take food from these dabbawalas. So how can we say that these dabbawalas or these Marathas who are predominantly tiffinwalas, they are backward? So number one, the Supreme Court rejected the contention of the Maharashtra state that Marathas are socially and educationally backward. And the Supreme Court also said that since because of this Maratha reservation, the 50% cap which was imposed by the Supreme Court has been violated, that is why this Maratha reservation is unconstitutional. In this very judgment, Supreme Court also took away the powers of the states to specify their own socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. The Supreme Court basically said that we will have the central list of OBCs, and the President of India, in consultation with the governors of the states, the President will specify who are socially and educationally backward. That means the states do not have the right, do not have the power to specify their own socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. The entire power was given to the center. The government of India filed a review petition against this judgment, and even this review petition was rejected by the Supreme Court. And that is why we have now a 127th Constitutional Amendment Bill. What this bill basically does, it amends Article 342 capital A again. Why? So that it is clarified that in order to maintain federal structure of the country, in a federal structure where states have their own powers, own responsibilities, in order to maintain this federal structure, the state governments are empowered to maintain and prepare their own list of those who are socially and educationally backward. That is why this constitutional amendment bill was necessitated, and because of this constitutional amendment bill, the states have been given their powers back. Now they can also maintain and prepare their own list of those who are socially and educationally backward. That is issue number one. Issue number two deals with the 50% cap on reservation. During the debate on this constitutional amendment, many lawmakers raised this issue that it is time that we remove this 50% limit on the reservations imposed by the Supreme Court in the year 1993. In fact, in the Maratha reservation, the argument presented by the Maharashtra state was that we need to review the Indira Sani judgment. Because in Indira Sani judgment, Supreme Court imposed a 50% limit on the reservation. Reservation cannot exceed 50% unless and until the circumstances are extraordinary. In this very judgment, the Supreme Court accepted. The Supreme Court said, yes, this 50% cap that has been imposed by the Supreme Court is arbitrary because there is no logic in specifying 50% cap. Why is it 50%? Why is it not 60% or 70% or 20%? The Supreme Court accepted that yes, this 50% cap on reservation is arbitrary, but there is no reason to revisit this judgment because since we have implemented this judgment for more than 2 decades, that is why there is no need to review this Indira Sani judgment. Now the lawmakers are demanding that we should remove this 50% cap on reservation because the social condition of the 1993 is vastly different from the social condition of 2021. That is why we need to revisit Indira Sani judgment. That is why we need to remove this 50% cap on reservations. Then we have issue number 3. We have a list of people who are SCs and STs, but we do not enumerate the total number of OBCs in this country. That is why there is a growing demand in this country, particularly from various political parties which are concentrated in Bihar and UP and Madhya Pradesh, that we should have caste-based census in this country so that we can get the real idea of the number of OBCs in this country. So if we have to summarize this newspaper article, number 1, 127th Constitutional Amendment Bill has been passed. But once it will be signed, assented to by the President of India, this will become 105th Constitutional Amendment Act. Because there are other constitutional amendment bills which are pending. That is why the number for this bill is 127. But once this bill becomes an act, it is signed by the President of India, it will become 105th Constitutional Amendment Act. That's number 1. And because of this constitutional amendment, the states have been given the right that you are empowered to maintain and prepare your own list of socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. That's number 1. Number 2, lawmakers are now demanding that we should remove the 50% limit on reservations. And there is a growing demand from lawmakers in this country that we should have a caste-based census so that we get the real idea about the number of OBCs in this country. Because we know how many SCs, how many STs are there in the country. We need to now know how many OBCs are there in this country. That is it that you need to know from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another very important article on the same page number 1 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu, again relevant for GS paper 2. Because today's newspaper is dominated by the polity related news. The year was 2020. What Supreme Court did? Supreme Court made it mandatory for all political parties that what you have to do, publish on your website as well as in 2 newspapers. What? Information regarding the candidates that have been set up by you in elections. Who are these candidates? Candidates with criminal past, candidates with pending criminal cases. So the Supreme Court in 2020 mandated that all political parties, you have to prominently display on your website as well as you have to publish in 2 newspapers information regarding the candidates that you have set up for these elections. Basically, you have to tell the people of this country, why did you give tickets to those candidates who have a criminal past, who have criminal cases pending against them? And you don't have to give this reason of winnability. You don't have to tell us that because these candidates have the potential to win these elections, that is why because of their winnability factor, we are giving them tickets. You have to specifically mention why you gave tickets to these candidates who have a criminal past, who have criminal cases pending against them, because the citizens have the right to know. This right to know is a fundamental right under Article 19(1)(a). And you have to give this information within 48 hours. So today you have announced that this particular candidate is your candidate for this particular constituency. Within 48 hours of your announcement, you have to mention this information on your website and in 2 newspapers as well, or not less than 2 weeks before the first date of filing nomination papers, whichever is earlier, which means today is the first date of filing nomination papers. 2 weeks before, you should have provided this information to the people, because people have the right to know about the criminal past of the candidates set up by political parties. Or within 48 hours of your announcement of this candidature, you have to prominently display this information on the website as well as publish in 2 newspapers. But don't tell us that you have selected these candidates because of their winnability. You have to tell us the exact reason why you chose to give tickets to these candidates with criminal past. But then elections took place. Elections took place in Bihar as well. And political parties seem to have violated this Supreme Court verdict of 2020. That is why contempt of court case was filed against various political parties in the Supreme Court as well as against the Election Commission of India. Because the petitioners argued that Election Commission of India has failed to take action against these political parties because they have not abided by the 2020 Supreme Court judgment. The petitioner basically asked that Election Commission should be told that you de-recognize these political parties which have failed to abide by the 2020 judgment of the Honorable Supreme Court. Because there were some political parties which completely failed to abide by the Supreme Court order. For example, Communist Party of India Marxist, Nationalist Congress Party of Sharad Pawar, they failed to completely abide by this order. There were some political parties which merely said that we have chosen these candidates because of their winnability. And then there were other clever political parties which did publish this information regarding their candidates, but in those newspapers which no one reads, basically violating the spirit of the 2020 judgment. That is why petition was filed in the Supreme Court, basically asking the Supreme Court to punish these political parties for contempt. And now what the Supreme Court has done, it has fined these political parties. Some political parties were fined 1 lakh rupees. Political parties such as NCP and CPIM, they were fined 5 lakh rupees. Why? Because they completely ignored this 2020 judgment. And Supreme Court basically said that the nation continues to wait. The nation is losing its patience. The Supreme Court said that we regret that the lawmakers of this country, they do not have the intention of cleansing the polluted stream of politics in this country. But 2 things you have to keep in mind. Number 1, the petitioners asked that Election Commission should be directed that ECI should de-recognize those political parties which have not abided by this judgment. The Supreme Court did not agree with this plea, did not agree with this request. Supreme Court basically said, if we direct Election Commission of India to do this, we are entering into the realm of lawmaking. But because of the separation of powers, we cannot dictate such terms to Election Commission of India. So this is something that we will not agree with. We will not issue directive to the Election Commission of India that you should de-recognize these political parties. But the political parties had requested the Supreme Court that please modify your 2020 judgment. Why? Because various political parties, they convinced the Supreme Court that please look at the ground reality. In most cases, candidates are finalized by political parties between the period commencing from the date the elections are notified till the last date of the withdrawal of the nomination papers. So if you're saying not less than 2 weeks before the first date of filing of nomination papers, if we have to publish this information on our website and publish this information in 2 national newspapers, maybe we have not finalized the candidates by then. That means tomorrow again somebody will file a contempt application before the court. That is why the Supreme Court agreed with the political parties, saying now within 48 hours of your selection, of the selection of your candidates, you should publish this information on your website and in 2 prominent newspapers. So this requirement of you having to submit this information not less than 2 weeks before the first date of filing of nomination papers. This you don't have to comply with, but within 48 hours of your announcement of a candidature, you have to publish this information because the people have the right to know. And Supreme Court ordered something else. The Supreme Court said that now on your websites, you have to create a new caption called candidates with criminal antecedents. That too on the home page. On your home page of your websites, at a very prominent location, you are displaying the information regarding the candidates with criminal past, with pending criminal cases, so that it is easier for the voter to get this information. That is what you need to know from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 12 of today's The Hindu newspaper. Prime Minister Modi launches Ujjwala 2.0 scheme. The year was 2016. To be specific, May 2016, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas introduced Prime Minister's Ujjwala Yojana. What was the objective? The objective was to make clean cooking fuel, for example, LPG, available. To whom? To women belonging to rural and deprived households. Why? Because otherwise they would use firewood, they would use coal, they would use cow dung cakes, which is injurious to their health as well as the environment. The target was that we will release 8 crore LPG connections by March 2020. And this target has already been achieved. Who was eligible under this scheme? Woman who must have attained 18 years of age. And this woman should belong to SC or ST community, should belong to most backward classes. This woman should be a forest dweller, for example. People belonging to poor households. The women of such eligible criteria, they were eligible to get this LPG connection under Ujjwala scheme. But there was a document required to avail this scheme, and this document was the proof of address. But what about the migrant workers? Now these migrant workers are the special attention of Ujjwala 2.0 scheme. Now migrant workers would only be required to submit a self-declaration of their residential address to get the gas connection. They don't need to submit ration cards or address proof. This self-declaration will serve as an address proof. And now under this Ujjwala 2.0 scheme or Yojana, 10 million LPG connections will have to be provided to the beneficiaries. And this was something which was announced in the Union Budget 2021-22. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another newspaper article on page number 12 of today's The Hindu newspaper, relevant for GS paper 2. High Court nod must to close cases against lawmakers. Let me provide you with the context. The year was 2020. The Supreme Court had asked the high courts of this country that you should set up special benches. Special benches to monitor the progress of criminal cases against sitting as well as former legislators. That means Supreme Court basically asked two things. Number one, set up special benches so that these special benches will hear the cases against the sitting legislators, against the former legislators, so that quickly we can dispose of these cases. And then we should also have special benches to monitor such cases against these legislators. But what the state governments have been doing, they've been using or misusing or overusing or abusing Section 321 of Criminal Procedure Code CRPC. What is this Section 321 of CRPC? This allows a public prosecutor or an assistant public prosecutor that you can request for the withdrawal of a case by making an application before a court. And this withdrawal should be in larger public interest. I'll give you one example. For example, this is the state Punjab, and then there are state employees which have been protesting against the state government. Basically, they are asking for salary hike, or they're asking for better standard of living. They're asking for better insurance facilities, so on and so forth. And now these state employees, since they are protesting, they also are accused of damaging public property. And now the case is filed against these state government employees who were protesting against the state government, and thereby they also damaged the public property. But then there were negotiations between the state government and then these employees. And then this public prosecutor for the larger public interest is applying before the court and requesting for the withdrawal of this case before the court in the larger public interest. But the state governments have been misusing this provision. In Karnataka, for example, the state government decided to withdraw 61 cases. And many of these cases were against the former and present legislators. Uttarakhand, for example, made an application for withdrawing a murder case against a sitting MLA. UP government, according to newspaper reports, is also planning to do the same. If you look at the data, as of September 2020, total of 4,859 cases are pending against MPs and MLAs in this country. To prevent the misuse of Section 321 of Criminal Procedure Code, now the Supreme Court has said that you don't have to approach a regular court or a district court or a trial court. You have to necessarily approach the High Court. Only when the High Court will give you the permission to withdraw the case, only then can the cases against the lawmakers be withdrawn. So long story short, a public prosecutor will have to approach a High Court if it wants to use Section 321 of the Criminal Procedure Code, basically requesting the withdrawal of a case against a legislator. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news on page number 12. The government has said that there is no decision yet on a nationwide NRC called National Register of Citizens, but NPR will be updated. What is the difference between the two? National Register of Citizens, it contains the details of only the citizens of India. But what about NPR, National Population Register? It contains the details of only the usual residents of India. And usual residents can be citizens, can be aliens as well, can be foreigners as well. Now, who is a usual resident? Whoever has resided in this country or any part of this country for 6 months or more, or is planning to stay in India or any part of the territory of India for 6 or more months, such individuals are termed as usual residents, and it is mandatory for all the usual residents to register themselves under NPR, National Population Register. So the minister has said that there is no decision yet on NRC because NRC was updated only for Assam few years ago. That too on the directions of the Honorable Supreme Court of India. But there is no decision yet on the nationwide NRC, but NPR will be updated according to the government. Now let's look at some of the editorials from today's The Hindu newspaper. First up, choppy waters. India is now the president of the United Nations Security Council for the month of August 2021. Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian Prime Minister to chair a meeting on maritime security. This meeting was also attended amongst others by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. This editorial is basically praising Honorable Prime Minister Mr. Modi for taking this initiative and for steering a discussion on maritime security. But this editorial also says that India must push for ratification of UNCLOS by all major maritime powers, including the United States of America. Let's try and understand what is this UNCLOS. UNCLOS basically stands for United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. From 18th century to the middle of 20th century, the world was informally, not formally, informally following one principle called freedom of the seas. It was not a formal principle but an informal one. And what do we mean by freedom of the seas? For example, this is the land of India. From the baseline till 3 nautical miles, this territory belongs to India. This territory belongs to the state. This was a norm set by imperialist powers such as Britain, France, and others. Why 3 nautical miles? Because a cannon shot fired from the baseline could reach up to 3 nautical miles. That is why from the baseline till up to 3 nautical miles, this was considered to be the territory of a country. This was considered to be the territorial water. That means even this water is the territory of this particular country. After Second World War, many countries said, no, why 3 nautical miles? Our territorial waters extend up to 12 nautical miles. United States said, no, why only 12 nautical miles? Up to 200 nautical miles will be the territory of that country. Then came UNCLOS. UNCLOS, it was signed in the year 1982 and it entered into force in the year 1994. According to this UNCLOS, if this is the baseline, up to 12 nautical miles, this is what we call territorial waters. For example, if this is India, from the baseline till 12 nautical miles, this is what we call territorial waters. This is the territory of India, which means the laws of the land, laws of India will apply on this territorial water. Then further, for again 24 nautical miles, this is what we call contiguous zone. And then further up to 200 nautical miles, this is what we call exclusive economic zone. And then beyond exclusive economic zone, we have the high seas. Now, what is the benefit of this exclusive economic zone? For example, from the baseline of India till 12 nautical miles, this is the territorial water of India. But after that, up to 200 nautical miles, this is the exclusive economic zone of India. That means India has the exclusive right to exploit the marine resources that are found in this exclusive economic zone. That means whether it is oil, whether it is natural gas, whether it is fisheries, all these are to be exclusively exploited by India. The beneficiaries of these exclusive economic zones are countries with huge coastline. For example, Russia, for example, Australia, and then the big archipelago island states such as Indonesia, such as Japan. But when we look at this territorial sea, does that mean a ship, whether it is a civilian ship or whether it is a warship, does that mean this ship of another country cannot sail, cannot enter the territorial waters of India? Yes, it can enter, and Indian government will provide for an innocent passage. Innocent passage, that means this ship should not be detrimental to the peace, to the security, to the goodwill of India. That means this ship, it should not activate its weapon sensors. But this year, a US warship named John Paul Jones, it entered 130 nautical miles west of Lakshadweep Islands. And that too without informing India. And this 130 nautical miles, it is within the exclusive economic zone of India. So on one hand, United States considers India as an ally against China. And on the other hand, it is using its warships, and these warships are entering the exclusive economic zone, sometimes contiguous zone as well, sometimes territorial waters as well, without informing India. And United States calls this freedom of navigation operation, FONOPS, freedom of navigation operations. And why United States is able to do that? Because United States has not ratified UNCLOS. Similarly, Israel has not ratified, Turkey has not ratified, Canada has not ratified. And that is why this editorial says India must push for ratification of UNCLOS by all major maritime powers, including United States of America. That is what you need to understand from this editorial. Now let's look at the last editorial to be discussed today under meaning justice. This is related to high courts and it is related to tribunals. For example, you would know, because of the second judge's case and third judge's case of the year 1993 and 1998, India is perhaps the only country in the world where judges are appointed by themselves. The names are recommended by the collegium. These names are forwarded to the government of the day, and the government appoints these nominees to the high courts and Supreme Court of this country. But then the issue number one related to high courts is that there are close to 455 vacancies in various high courts. Why? Because despite the fact that names are recommended by the collegium to the government is sitting on these names, the government is not appointing these judges to the high courts. Why? Because there is still a confusion, a controversy on memorandum of procedure. What is this memorandum of procedure? This memorandum of procedure deals with judicial appointments. The government is insisting that whenever a name is recommended by a collegium to the government, according to this memorandum of procedure, the government should have the opportunity to reject a name. The collegium, the Supreme Court is saying you cannot reject a name. You can only seek clarity. You can give in written what are your concerns regarding these names suggested by the collegium. But you don't have the power, you don't have the option of rejecting a name. So this editorial says that maybe because of the lack of clarity on this memorandum of procedure, that is why we see lots and lots of vacancies in the high courts. They have not been filled by the government. And this is causing a great harm to India's justice delivery system. That's number one, related to high courts. What about tribunals? These tribunals, you would know, they have members from executive and they have members from judiciary as well. What is the purpose of a tribunal? There are lots of purposes, but broadly there are two main purposes. Number one purpose, reduce load on high courts and the Supreme Court. And number two, bring in subject experts. Subject experts, for example, we have Central Administrative Tribunal, we have Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, we have National Green Tribunal, we have Securities Appellate Tribunal. All these tribunals play a very specialized role. But these judges, they may not be well experienced. They may not have enough expertise to deal with such important cases. That is why experts are drawn from the executive, so that members of the executive, together with the members of the judiciary, they will solve these related cases and ultimately they will reduce load on the regular judiciary as well. But then the issue is these tribunals should also have the same level of independence from the executive as judiciary is having, as high courts and Supreme Court is having. Because tribunals should have the same level of independence from the executive. Because these tribunals should be independent in their functioning as well. And for that, the selection of members of these tribunals should be done in a very fair manner. And that is why in November 2020, the Supreme Court specified that the selection committee of tribunals who will appoint members to these tribunals should have Chief Justice of India as its member, should have a retired Supreme Court judge or a Chief Justice of a High Court as its member, should have Secretary to the Ministry of Law and Justice as its member, should have Secretary of a non-parent ministry as a member. What do we mean by non-parent ministry? For example, we have CAT, Central Administrative Tribunal, which deals with the disputes of All India Services and Central Civil Service officers. What is the parent department of CAT? It is Department of Personnel and Training, which means Secretary of Department of Personnel and Training should not be the member. He can be a member but without a vote. A secretary to a non-parent department should have the vote in this committee to decide who should be the members of these tribunals. Long story short, under meaning justice, this editorial talks about two important things. Number one, there are more than 455 vacancies in high courts, various high courts. The government is not filling these vacancies. And this undermines justice delivery system in this country. Number two, regarding the tribunals, there are close to 240 vacancies in various tribunals. And this issue has been flagged by the Honorable Chief Justice of India, Mr. N.V. Ramana as well. To ensure that these tribunals also have some degree of independence from the executive, in November 2020, the Supreme Court specified that the selection committee, which means the committee which will select members to these tribunals, they should consist of Chief Justice of India, retired Supreme Court judge or a Chief Justice of a High Court, Secretary of the central government belonging to Law and Justice Ministry, then Secretary of the central government but from a non-parent ministry. But the Secretary of the central government of the parent ministry will also be a member of this committee, but he will not have the right to vote to select members to these tribunals. This editorial says that there are many tribunals which lack presiding officers, and the recommendations of the selection committee have not been acted upon. That is why the editorial says the government must explain the unusual delay in filling up vacancies in courts as well as the tribunals. That is what you need to understand from this editorial. Now let's look at the practice questions. 2 questions for your mains practice. Write these answers in 250 words and submit. Question number 1. To change 50% reservation limit is to have a society which is not founded on equality but based on caste rule. Critically analyze. This was the statement given by the Honorable Supreme Court when it pronounced upon the constitutionality of the Maratha reservation. Number 2, UNCLOS is almost universally lauded for laying down laws and rules whose wide acceptance, it is believed, has greatly reduced the number, the frequency, and the potential for interstate conflicts that would have otherwise taken place. Interstate conflicts basically means conflicts between the countries, not the states of India. Write these answers in 250 words and submit to us. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great evening.